Good morning, dear respected teacher, dear beloved community. This is where I'm supposed to remember the date. I can't remember the date. 2nd of what? 22nd of June. 2025, right. I know that much. Yes, and we are in the upper hamlet of Plum village in France on the second day of our retreat for scientists, and not just scientists, scientists and contemplatives, perhaps. And this morning I'm supposed to give a short talk. Yeah, I think I can see some of you know my reputation already. So I'm going to do my best. How's the sound? Is it okay? Yeah. So there is so much that we would like to share with you. And I'd actually like to know kind of who's in the room. Well, there's many ways of asking that question, but just permit me to do a little experiment. Is there anybody here who identifies as a mathematician? You can raise your hand. Yeah. I'm going to put one finger up. I don't really identify as a mathematician, but that's one thing that I did at one point a long time ago. Okay, physicists. Oh, yeah, we got some physicists. Great. You can raise your hand more than once if you want. Chemists. Yeah, we got a few. Biologists. Oh, yeah, okay, good number of biologists. Wonderful. Physiologists. Anyone? Yeah, okay, good some. Pharmacologists. Yeah, we got a pharmacologist, at least one. What else have we got? Ecologists. Yeah, I see some hands. Okay, wonderful. Zoologists. Yes, 1, 2, some. Okay. Engineers. Oh, yeah. Engineer. Hello, engineers. Wonderful. Computer scientists. Oh, hello. Yes. AI? Anyone working on AI? Yeah? Okay, cool. Hello. What else? Geologists? Any geologists? One. Oh, welcome. We have a geologist. Wonderful. Okay. I'm going to miss tons. So I think there's quite a lot of people in the medical space. So doctors. Yeah. A lot of doctors. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists. Okay. A lot of people in the kind of healing space. Philosophers. Yeah, okay. Neuroscientists. Ah, there you are. Okay. Cognitive science. Kind of maybe raise your hand again. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. And forgive me if I don't. Why don't we? You can call out if I didn't mention your discipline. Musicologist. Okay. Wonderful. Welcome. Anthropologist. Anthropologist. You can raise your hand. Yay. Social research. Yeah, anyone in social research? Social scientists. Social scientists, yes. Contemplative scientists. I'm going to put my hand up for that one. Artists.
Artistic research.
Artistic research. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Astronomer. Yes. Okay. Anyone else? Astrophysicists. Anyone? You got astrophysicists in the room? Lawyers. Yes. Okay. I mean, why not? Great. Anything else? Pedagogues. Yeah. Pedagogy? Anyone? Education? Yeah, I'm probably in there too. Maybe. Any meditators? Yeah, there's a few. Yeah. Okay. Pretty interesting. Thank you. Thank you for participating in my little survey. Two weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a retreat for artists. And a big part of my store consciousness, yesterday we learned about store consciousness. So a lot of the seeds in my store consciousness were resonating happily with the artists. And now we have a retreat for scientists. And a lot of seeds in my store consciousness are also resonating happily. And I can see a lot of friends in this group. Past friends, present friends, and probably future friends. And I feel there's a lot of shared interests and affinities also between us all. So there are so many rabbit holes that I could kind of dive down this morning, and I'm going to really try my best not to do that, and to stay on on some kind of path. And I want to propose to you that, following on from what Sister Langnim shared yesterday, that there's some kind of affinity between meditators and scientists. And this is something that our teacher proposed as well, that we share the need or the desire to discover. We are curious. We want to find out things, find out why and how and what, maybe. And I think there's another thing that we share in principle, which is a commitment to being open-minded. In principle. And sometimes, as meditators or Buddhists or people on a spiritual path, we may lose our open-mindedness and we become very overconfident. Or we become rigid or very certain. We may start to think that we know. And that's very dangerous. So could you also raise your hand if this is your first time in Plum Village? Wonderful. Welcome. So you have a big advantage because you have beginner's mind. This is your first time. You get to have this first experience. For the rest of us, it is much harder. We're in trouble. We're in big trouble because we may have the tendency to think that we know. So we need to be very careful. If this is, and I say that to myself. As scientists as well, in principle, we're committed to openness, open-mindedness, and kind of objectivity, and being willing to release our views and our ways of understanding in order to progress and to adopt new ways of understanding. We know that, according to at least some theories of philosophy of science, science advances in the process of paradigm change. So for a paradigm to change, there has to be a willingness of some people at least to let go of one way of thinking. And that can be very hard to do, especially if we are good at that way of thinking and our career has become attached or sort of we've been successful in one way of thinking. So for me, I think one of the functions of this retreat and maybe of this practice can be to see if we can be better scientists and maybe better meditators or better Buddhists, if you're a Buddhist, I don't know. I'm not even sure that I'm a Buddhist, by the way, so we'll see. But how open-minded can we be? How willing to release our current ways of knowing can we be? And this is in relation to also what Sister Langlim shared about yesterday as the obstacle of knowledge, that which we think we know. There's nothing wrong with knowledge, but when knowledge becomes certainty or attachment to knowledge, it can be a big obstacle. So we need to be willing to release it. Especially when it comes in the form of assumptions about the nature of reality. And some of those assumptions about the nature of the reality may not be acknowledged. They may be partly invisible to us. They're just maybe part of a kind of consensus reality that we no longer question. Maybe we felt like we could question it when we were 18. You know, it was like cool to question everything, and at a certain point you have to get on with life and start publishing and, you know, be a grown-up and live in the real world. Very important business, living in the real world. So we're going to see if we can maybe reveal some of these hidden assumptions or unacknowledged assumptions and allow ourselves to question them again. And so in the course of doing that, whether in the next hour or in the next few days, there may be moments where you feel challenged, or you feel even a kind of reaction coming up. So I invite you just to notice that and become curious about that and kind of say, oh, look, I'm reacting. How interesting. I'm being challenged in what I believe to be the case. How interesting. And the more we can be interested in that, and then we kind of have a chance to maybe to discover something new. So, yesterday, Sister Langlim, I don't know how many of you realized, but in 1.5 hours, she basically gave you what would usually be unfolded in the course of about a week in Plum Village. So this is an advanced course in Buddhist psychology. And so there may be some things which I'll lightly revisit, but I'll also try to keep us moving forward. But I just want to point out that maybe some of these hidden assumptions that might be there kind of resonating in the space. So when we draw a circle on the board and we give a map or a model of consciousness, and we say this is thought consciousness, this is mind consciousness, and then the layer in between, which is called manas. We may read that in particular ways based on some assumptions that we have about the nature of consciousness. So, one assumption that may or may not be here in the room, that you may or may not subscribe to, is that consciousness is a function of the brain. Maybe, maybe not. Or that consciousness is localized in the brain. There may also be a tendency to assume the computer metaphor of consciousness or of brain, actually. Brain as computer is a metaphor which is so ubiquitous at the moment that sort of whether or not we actually subscribe to it, we may inadvertently lean on it a lot of the time. And it shows up in our language all the time. We talk about, updating our mental operating system. We talk about bandwidth. Oh, I don't have the bandwidth for that, right? There's probably many other expressions. And there's even an underlying metaphor, an older one, which we may inadvertently be leaning on as well, which is body as machine. Right? So this has a close connection with the concept of self. So body as machine, I think, is as old as the Industrial Revolution. Say, oh, I'm running out of steam. I'm running out of steam. How interesting. Oh, I need a tune-up. Or I'm running on all cylinders. Right? I'm sorry if English isn't your first language, but there must be equivalent expressions, I think, in most of our languages. My body is a well-oiled machine. That's barely even a metaphor anymore, right? It's so in your face. And yet, so what are the consequences of this metaphor? For example, we may think that we are relatively unaffected by what we consume. That there is an I, a person, a self, an entity, which exists, which is relatively constant, and which consumes fuel. Right? So body as machine entails food as fuel. Right? So if I'm a machine, then the machine needs fuel. And the thing about machines is that they are relatively unaffected or unchanged by the passage of fuel through them. Right? You put petrol into a car, or gas if you're in America, and then it burns. Right? And you get exhaust and heat and motion, but the substance of the car appears to be relatively unaffected. Of course, there's wear and tear, right? There's friction and things break down, but ultimately the car is the car. The fuel passes through it and is burned and released as exhaust. The same is not true of us. We are not machines. Right? The food doesn't just pass through us, it also becomes us. It is us. An organic entity is in a much deeper process of communication, interaction, resonance, transformation. And we're not only affected by the food that we eat, right? We're also transformed and in flux, in a state of flow with what we consume through our senses. I sometimes do a little experiment. Anyone in the Buddhism and Mental Health Toronto psychology class, what was it called? That class that we did together, Ellie's class? Put up your hand. Yes. So I don't know if I did this experiment with you, but it's an experiment I like to do sometimes, which is we organize ourselves in pairs. I'm not going to have time to do it now, so I'll just tell you about it. We form into pairs, and then I ask one member of the pair to be the listener, and the other person shares. And the idea is that the one who shares, their task is to share the most joyful, uplifting, inspirational thing that happened to them in the last week, say. So you think of the most amazing thing that happened to you, and you just tell the other person about it. And the task of the person who's listening is to be completely indifferent and unmoved. So you have to sit there and not react. And of course, it's utterly impossible. And so nobody is able to do it so far. And I've run this experiment many, many times. Nobody can do it. And they all end up smiling, they end up laughing, and then you switch roles and the other person tries. It doesn't work. And the point of that is to demonstrate that what we maybe think of as our feelings or my feelings, they're not mine. They don't exist inside some kind of impermeable boundary. We are utterly permeable to feeling, maybe much more so than we realize. So feeling is also a kind of food, right? The quality of feeling of the people around us. We are consuming it. It becomes part of us. It changes us. It affects us. We could talk about the quality of collective consciousness. When I first came to Plum Village, I heard this term, collective consciousness. I immediately had my skeptical face. I was like, yeah, collective consciousness, sure. Yeah. Sounds like superstitious woo-woo babble, I don't know about that. Because I had the assumption that consciousness is a function of the brain, right? And that consciousness is located in the brain, which also sits on top of the brain as computer metaphor and the body as machine metaphor, which all sits on top of the scientific materialist assumption that reality is made up of matter and energy, which obeys, or maybe physicalism is more exact, and that matter and energy obey the laws of physics everywhere, throughout all of time and space, in exactly the same way, maybe with the exception of the Big Bang. But details. But that assumption for me was not. I didn't realize that it was an assumption. For me, it was a sort of matter of settled fact. Okay, that's one of the rabbit holes that I'm not going to go down. It's hard. Okay, don't go down the rabbit hole. We'll try. We're going to try. Okay, so some other things that might be happening. When we talk about store consciousness and mind consciousness and manas, we might hear store consciousness and then sort of translate it or identify it with things that are more familiar, like if you're a Jungian, collective unconscious, right? Or if you're a Freudian, the unconscious, right? And if you're a neuroscientist, you might think, background consciousness. That's background consciousness. And you think of mind consciousness, you might associate it with, there are different terms, workspace consciousness, access consciousness, right? So it's helpful up to a point. But it's very, very important to be aware of those identifications, if we're making them, and to know that they may or may not be correct. So has anyone read Thinking Fast and Slow? Kahneman, yeah? So Kahneman identifies system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is the part of our mind which does automatic parallel processing, which is very rapid and mostly unconscious, and could be called basically our intuition or gut sense, or making a quick judgments without effortful calculation. System 2 is the effortful, very glucose-intensive process of actually thinking through problems and calculating and, checking the evidence and so on. So Kahneman is big on system 2, not so big on system 1. He says we need to be careful. We make use of system 1 all the time, and it's kind of unreliable. And some people might have the tendency to think, oh, system 1, that's store consciousness. That's the rapid parallel processing. And up to a point, yes, up to a point. There might also be a tendency to want to locate store consciousness and mind consciousness in the brain. Right? If you believe that consciousness is a function of brain, then it's natural to say, well, okay, maybe there are parts of the brain that kind of underwrite what we call store consciousness, and other parts of the brain that underwrite what we call mind consciousness. So some people have, I know when I first encountered the term store consciousness, I thought, oh, that sounds like the cerebellum. So if you know anything about the brain, it's when Tai would present store consciousness, and I think Sister Langnam did this yesterday, she talked about the ability of store consciousness to learn sequenced tasks and to automate things. So when we learn to drive, at first it's very effortful, and after a while we can do it without conscious effort. And so that sort of store consciousness has learned, and we know, I believe, in neuroscience, the cerebellum seems to have an important role in this kind of learning of sequenced tasks and the kind of unconscious execution of those sequence activities. Like you learn the steps of a dance, you learn to drive, you, I don't know, you can think of more examples. So there's another tendency I've noticed that some people, when they learn about the differences of the two hemispheres, so there's the way of bringing experience into being of the left hemisphere and the way of bringing experience into being of the right hemisphere seem to have very different characters. And if you've gone down that rabbit hole, you might think, oh, okay, right hemisphere, that sounds like store consciousness, left hemisphere sounds more like mind consciousness. I don't know how relevant this is for any of you, but if it is, be careful. Beware. This is just kind of warnings. So, in the course of this retreat, no, that's another rabbit hole. Don't go down that rabbit hole. Okay. That is a massive rabbit hole. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. Okay. So, instead, so building on what Sister Langnam shared yesterday, I'm going to talk about some of the mental formations. So if you remember, she said in store consciousness is all the seeds, and when the seeds are touched by sense impressions, they manifest in mind consciousness as mental formations. So, we may have a tendency, when we first encounter mental formations, to think about things that are more like emotions, basically. So we think, okay, anger is a mental formation, fine. Happiness is a mental formation, compassion, kindness, regret, vengefulness, deceitfulness, trust. All of these are mental formations, and there are various lists in the Buddhist tradition. Quite often it's 51. There are 51, and you can memorize them, and it's quite fun. And then you can see, can I actually distinguish them in my experience? Can I? Because that's the practice, to name them when they come up, and you see like, oh, which mental formation or which mental formations are manifest in my mind consciousness right now. Hopefully, mindfulness. So, what I want to do is to talk about some special mental formations, and these are called the 5 universal mental formations. So they're universal because they operate all the time, and they operate at every level of consciousness. And it might seem kind of technical at first, but what's important to remember when we go into this topic of Buddhist psychology is that its purpose is not to make theories or descriptions of reality, including of consciousness or mind. The purpose is to help us navigate the problem of suffering and happiness. Right? This is very important. So the first universal mental formation is contact. And in Sanskrit, that is sparsha. So contact is defined as a kind of a vibration on the surface of store. So store consciousness is sitting there quietly, and something one of the senses is activated, and this is a little bit technical, but in the coming together of sense object, sense organ, and sense consciousness, contact manifests. So basically that means for contact to arise, there have to be these three things. There has to be, let's say, in the case of visual contact, there has to be something to see, there has to be an organ of sight, the eye, and there has to be eye consciousness. So the eye alone is not enough, there has to be consciousness, and these co-arise. None of them is thought of as pre-existing any of the others, and then also not conceived of as separately existent. A little bit tricky, but very important. So basically, contact is happening all the time across all our senses in every moment. All our senses, we're hearing, we're seeing, we're smelling, tasting, touching, and propriocepting and interocepting, and there's more than 5 senses, right? That's another rabbit hole we're not going to go down. But so there's lots of sensory contact happening all the time. And the question is, to which contact will we pay attention? Because there's so much coming in, we can't possibly pay attention to all of it. So this is where the second universal mental formation comes in, which is attention. Which is manaskara. So mostly when contact is occurring, there's a nice description in the sort of classical literature, which is of an insect, like a water insect, like a water skater landing on the surface of the water, and it causes a ripple. But if the ripple is not strong enough, then basically it fades away. So we are ignoring most of the contact that is happening in every moment. The only reason that we attend to one contact in particular is if it's strong enough or unusual enough. Right? So if it's remarkable enough, our mind is drawn to it, and then it becomes attention. And this happens very, very rapidly. This sequence, there's 5 universal mental formations, and the sequence of 5 is thought to happen in a few milliseconds, basically. So it's a very, very rapid sequence of events that kind of are the mechanism of perception, or can be understood as how perception is arising in every moment. So attention can be of two kinds, appropriate and inappropriate. So there's things to which we can attend that are beneficial, that help us cultivate the beautiful things, and there's things to which we can attend that are less beneficial, that maybe water seeds of fear and hate and anger and so on. So part of this retreat is choosing what kinds of things we want to pay attention to, and also creating an environment which preferentially offers objects of appropriate attention, like, for example, the sound of the bell, which we could enjoy right now. So you can see if you can catch contact and attention. It's very fast. So another way to understand attention is as the basis of the third universal mental formation, which is feeling. So what we attend to, we have a feeling about. This is Vedana. And that feeling may be of at least three kinds, maybe four kinds. Pleasant, it could be a pleasant feeling. It could be unpleasant. It could be neutral, that's the classical three. And then our teacher, Tai, he added mixed, which I think is important. I think a lot of feelings are mixed, actually. Then it gets interesting. Remember, this is happening very, very fast. Based on feeling, we have a perception. Samjna. And perception in the classical literature is said to be the act of deriving a sign. Deriving a sign of the object of perception. So that in a sense it's like seeing and recognizing its properties. So when you perceive this leaf of the orchid, one of its signs or properties is green, right? Its color, its form as well. And very quickly with perception, there might come naming. So naming and conceiving, having a mental idea about the object of perception is part of the function of perception. It's also happening very rapidly. What we have to be careful about is that it might be a right perception, but it could be a wrong perception. And according to the Buddhist teaching, most of our perceptions are wrong. And the problem is that we tend to believe that our perceptions are accurate, and we rely on them as being sound, essentially, and correct. The problem is that in the process of perception, there's also mental construction. So we perceive based on pre-existing mental categories, very much including language, but also including feeling. And if our feeling is fear, right, it might cause us to perceive danger when there is no danger. So the example in the classical literature of walking at dusk or in the dark, and you see something on the path in front of you, and because it's dark, you're afraid, and you see a snake, and you jump back, and then you have an opportunity to take a closer look, and you realize it's a rope. It's not a snake. But you did see a snake. It's not that you didn't see a snake. That's the problem. The mind paints reality. And the painting of reality is so convincing that we actually believe it is reality. Right? But because feeling is first, depending on the feeling, you can perceive this or that, and it may or may not be accurate. So if you are feeling threatened, maybe as a nation, then you may have a tendency to perceive somebody very quickly. You decide they are the enemy, and you need to destroy them. Right? This is happening right now. So based on collective fear or collective rage, we have perceptions, we're very confident of those perceptions, and we act. And this is the fifth universal mental formation, which is volition. And cetana. It's the will to act based on what we think the object of our perception is. We kind of choose basically whether to approach or to withdraw or to be in a neutral relationship. So if we like it, then we feel attracted, drawn towards. If we don't like it, we think it's dangerous, not good for us, or disgusting, or we withdraw, or we're indifferent or neutral. Maybe we have mixed volitions as well. But it's very much based on this chain, this very, very rapid chain. And these 5 mental formations, which are happening all of the time, it's not, also I should have said that it's not just what we think of as sense contact, but also mental contact. So a thought also gives rise to contact and can give rise to attention, feeling, perception, and volition. And there's also feedback, right? So it's not exactly a linear process. So there's also feedback at every level. And these 5 can be understood to form something like a neural pathway. And the more we go down that neural pathway, the more we have that contact leading to that attention, leading to that feeling, that perception, and that volition, the stronger it becomes a habit. And that habit could be beneficial or unbeneficial. And so the question is this process automatic? Are we just mechanically, are we just machines? Can we have freedom? Is freedom possible? So you might like to observe today in walking meditation. In a sense, it's like once you've decided to walk, it's kind of automatic. Like, are you choosing every step? Or are you just on automatic pilot? When you eat your lunch, there's so many things happening. The tongue is, organizing the chewed food and the not yet chewed food, and moving it around your mouth and teeth, and your teeth are, your jaw's working and you're swallowing. Is that all automatic? Is it all mechanical? Or is there the possibility of freedom? Sometimes when you have a habit, maybe an addiction, it might feel like you don't have much freedom. That, once that addiction has been woken up, or that desire, or that habit, you're going down that pathway. You can't stop. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try, it doesn't seem like you can do anything about it. You can't resist. So, it would be interesting to know if freedom is possible or not. And it's also interesting to me that kind of in the modern scientific literature, there's quite a strong contingent of folks who have, based on a very comprehensive analysis of the evidence, concluded that there is no free will at all. Very interesting. And then you have our teacher, Tai, who comes along and says something. We had a conversation about this on the lawn yesterday. He said something very kind of deceptively simple. He said, mindfulness is free will. So, my suggestion would be for you not to take his word for it. Don't believe him. Test. So you can run an experiment in the next few days or in the next few moments and see, is it true that mindfulness is free will? What follows from this statement? I've really tried to understand, what does that mean? The first thing that I can conclude when I investigate the nature of my mindfulness energy is that it's not a binary. It's not either I'm mindful or I'm not mindful. I can be more or less mindful, right? There's degrees of mindfulness. My mindfulness can be more or less powerful, depending on how I have lived my day, or my days. What have I cultivated? Have I been generating the energy of mindfulness, right? And now, if I say generating the energy of mindfulness, in theory, you should know how to do that. So how do you generate the energy of mindfulness? Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. That is mindfulness of breathing. Just as one example, taking a step, I sense and I feel the contact of my foot with the ground. I feel my foot kissing the earth, lifting, placing. I can feel I'm walking and I know that I'm walking. That is mindfulness of walking, right? I'm eating my breakfast and I know that I'm eating my breakfast. That is mindfulness of breakfast eating. So whatever you're doing, if you know that you are doing it, you are generating the energy of mindfulness. This is very interesting. So now you know how to generate the energy of mindfulness. At any moment, right, you're always breathing, so you could always be generating the energy of mindfulness if you decide that that's something worthwhile. And then, so your energy of mindfulness can be more or less strong. So if it is true, and I'm not saying that it is, but if it is true that mindfulness is free will, then that would imply that free will also is not binary. It's not either I am free or I am not free. It's not an absolute. I could be more or less free. Right, so I'd say this as a hypothesis, and it's for you to test, to see, is it true that there are times when I have more freedom than others, when I'm more able to feel the impulses to act arising, maybe through this rapid chain, but because I've cultivated the energy of mindfulness, maybe I have a little moment to say, you know what? No, thank you. Right? Exactly as Sister Langnim shared yesterday. You have this little gap, this little option. Say, you know, I don't need to react. I would usually react, but I don't need to react. So it's a hypothesis, right? So we could do a study. You could say, well, if I practiced mindfulness for a week in Plum Village, would I experience more freedom from my habits? Right, we're not talking about freedom to, right? We're talking about freedom from. So it's not freedom to choose which kind of breakfast cereal you like. Right? It's freedom from being pushed and pulled by our conditioning. And we are very conditioned. But maybe there is the possibility of freedom. So, okay, I think I just have time for this. This takes to the next very interesting set of mental formations, which is the 5 particular mental formations. So these are the 5 universal, which means they're always operating all the time at every level of consciousness. The 5 particular mental formations are not always operating, but we can activate them should we so choose. So the first of the particulars is intention. Chanda. So, in principle, right, if we are free, then we can have intentions and we can choose, like the bellmaster is free to give rise to the intention to invite the bell. In principle. I could say a lot more about that, but I want to give time for the next session. So I'm just going to move on to the second one, which is conviction. Adimoksha. So it's kind of like you have a perception, and based on that perception you have a volition, which becomes the intention to act, and conviction can also be understood as the confirmation of your intention. So it's strengthening. It's a process from intention to confirmation. I'm sure I am going to do this. So be careful of conviction. So the conviction is one of the mental formations which also operates with manas. Manas is very sure. Right? So for a long time, I think in the West, we may have believed that that certainty is something that arises on the basis of the kind of rational evaluation of evidence. I look at the evidence and I make up my mind. If I'm sure, it's because I've looked at the evidence. What we now know from neuroscience, and what the Buddhists knew already a long time ago, is that certainty is not based on the evaluation of evidence. Certainty is more akin to a feeling. And it can be, you can feel certain very much independent from the evidence. And I think we can look around a little bit at the world and what people are very sure about, and it doesn't necessarily have much to do with evidence. And we can apply that to ourselves too. So beware of certainty, because it is a feeling, and it is a pleasant feeling. We like it. We like to feel sure because it's comfortable, it's safe, everything is settled, and we do not like the feeling of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a pleasant feeling, but it may be beneficial. Right? So it's interesting because in the classical list of 51 mental formations, doubt is classified as an unwholesome mental formation. But our teacher kind of updated it. He said, well, actually, doubt is very important. I mean, skepticism as a scientist is very important, but also as a spiritual practitioner, we should not be too sure. We should check. We should see for ourselves, if possible. So it's like trust but verify. You can have faith, but you can also check. So he reclassified doubt as an indeterminate mental formation. It can be positive or negative. So we have to be careful of our conviction that somebody is our enemy, that we should drop bombs on them. You know, Are we sure? And then the next one is mindfulness. Which, as we learned yesterday, is smriti. And I'm now going to have to accelerate a little bit. So the next three are this trio. So it's easy to remember. Mindfulness, concentration, and insight. Samadhi and prajna. So the beauty of this is, if we visualize this, the 5 universal mental formations as a neural pathway or as a habit that we've learned, mindfulness can intervene in that neural pathway at any stage. Mindfulness can intervene at the stage of contact, a little bit difficult, but possible. Can intervene at the stage of attention. We can decide, we can look at what we are paying attention to and decide, is it wholesome or unwholesome? Is it beneficial or unbeneficial? Is it appropriate or inappropriate? Which direction is this taking me in? That only mindfulness can tell you. You have a chance to examine the object of your attention. Is this going to take me in a beneficial direction or not? And that is freedom. You then have a choice. It can intervene at the stage of feeling. You can notice, what kind of feeling do I have? Is it pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, mixed? It gives you space. It gives you the possibility to evaluate. Is this helpful or unhelpful? Mindfulness can intervene at this stage of perception to ask, am I sure? Because we are very sure. So this is a wonderful practice to ask, am I sure? Am I sure about my perception? That this is my friend, that this is my enemy. Maybe my perception that consciousness is a function of the brain, or that my brain is a computer, my body is a machine. Even my perception that the person I'm seeing is a human being. That is a perception based on linguistic categories. But there is no separate human. Right? How do you have humans without chlorophyll, without photosynthesis, without all the green and growing things in the ocean and on the land? I don't think you'll find any humans without forests and algae, just as an example. And there are many others. So let's not be too sure about the objects of our perception. And of course, mindfulness can also intervene at the stage of volition. You already have the intention. Our teacher sometimes gave the example of, there's a cake, and you already see your hand reaching, So you have a volition. You already have, there's contact, attention, this is special, there's a cake. Definitely going to pay attention to the cake. You have feelings, oh yeah. You have a perception, this is good. And you have a vision, cake. Want cake, cake good, eat cake. Very strong. But you're already going for the cake, but mindfulness can still step in and say, are you sure? Are you sure? It's like, maybe I'm not hungry. Oh, I'm free from cake. Yeah, it's interesting. So mindfulness can intervene, but if mindfulness isn't strong enough, the habit will just, you notice, you say, oh yeah, I have intention and I'm doing it, oops. And I already did it, oops. So mindfulness needs to be sustained for it to become powerful. This is mindfulness. Mindfulness already carries the flavor of concentration. It already has. These are not really separate things, okay? So we give them separate names, but be careful of that as well. So mindfulness, if it is sustained, it naturally becomes concentration, becomes more powerful. And if we sustain concentration, it naturally becomes insight. And it's insight that can set us free. The thing is that very often we've already had the insight. So don't think when you've had the insight once that that's enough, that then you're done. Because another function of mindfulness is to recollect the insight. So it's bringing the insight of the past into the present, said, I know what is good for me. And I reactivate it, I bring it back to life. So, these are all things for you to play with, okay, in the next few days. This is, you're in the laboratory. You're in the laboratory of your own first-person direct experience. And you can be a scientist in that laboratory and run lots of little experiments. Say, well, what if I cultivate the energy of mindfulness? You could have a hypothesis. I will have more freedom as a hypothesis. And then you test. Is it true? I will have more insight. I will feel more joy. I will relax. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But if you don't try, you will not know. So this is just an invitation to experiment. Thank you. Let's enjoy 3 sounds of the bell.